Suicide and depression, where depression is a factor. Where are the most dangerous zones for suicide? Assuming that life is going along like this is somewhat level. It's actually kind of up and down if you look at it more closely. But if life is going along basically up here, and then you take a dive into depression, and then you get to the bottom, and what happens at the bottom? That's where you are so mentally and emotionally exhausted, you can't do a thing. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to clean the kitchen. You're not going to make dinner. You're not going to go to work today. You're flat. But eventually you come through that and you start to come up again. In this curve, right here to here, as you're going down, just before you hit the bottom, that's the most dangerous period. But then as you're coming out, this is where people begin to have a little more energy. They begin to think a little more clearly. They're able to do some things right in this period here. That's where their mood picks up. But the thing is, their mood sometimes picks up because now they've decided what they're going to do, and now they've got the energy to carry it out. And so they're at peace with that decision. They're friendly to people. They're more talkative than they were before because this is what they have planned. These are dangerous periods, and you need to be aware of that. Don't mistake that optimism as they're coming out of depression, that apparent optimism, as being a true optimism. A comment on suicide, alcohol, and drugs. Some 56% of men tested positive for one or more in their toxicology screen. When a person commits suicide, it's standard practice to do an autopsy. Part of that autopsy is to do a standard tox screen for certain chemicals. They don't test for everything, but there are a lot of frequently used drugs that are tested for, and in those tests, 56% of men tested positive for one or more. 67.5% of women tested positive. But the actual number is higher. And we know that because many prescription and over-the-counter drugs are not part of a routine toxicology screen. There's a new form of suicide that is on the scene now. It's called chemical. Sometimes the press calls it detergent suicides. Anybody familiar with that? Anybody? No? Started in Japan in 2008. And since 2008, there have been more than 2,000 deaths to this form of suicide. Spread to the U.S., there were 36 in 2010. That doubled in 2011. 80% of those deaths involved collateral injuries to others. In this form of suicide, you mix common household chemicals to produce hydrogen sulfide and hydrogen cyanide, both deadly gases. And the popularity of this form is due to its ready availability, it's fast acting, and it's certain to cause death. This is the list of the typical chemicals that are used. You mix an acid with a sulfur source. How many of these things do you have in your home? Lysol, shower tub and tile cleaner, Drano, dandruff shampoos, pesticides. You mix this stuff together, and in Ada County, Idaho, in May of 2009, this is what a deputy saw as he came up on a car that was parked on the side of the road. What do you notice about this car? What? Has a note taped to it. When a car is pulled over to the side, deputies will typically check it out. A suspicious vehicle, what's wrong? Is there somebody in the car? Is there somebody hurt in the car? What's going on? So he walked up and he saw these notes. And here's a picture of one of the notes. Hydrogen sulfide, suicide, poison gas, do not open, danger, one breath can kill. One breath can kill. In Japan, they've had to evacuate whole apartment buildings because somebody did this in their bathroom. They've had instances where somebody did it in a car and the first responders arrive, and their tendency is to open the car, break the windows, and there have been injuries and deaths related to doing that. So it's changed the way that we have to approach suspicious vehicles. Firefighters have to put on personal protective equipment in order to open a car, and usually there's a note. And in fact, it's so advanced that you can go online and the note's pre-printed. You can print it off. But you see the availability. It's easy to put these things together, and we are going to be seeing, I'm convinced, more. What are we to think of suicide? Some cultures tolerate and even encourage suicide. California, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, the state of Washington, and the District of Columbia all have physician-assisted suicide laws, PAS. In Montana, PAS is legal by a court decision. The Montana legislature never voted on it, but a judge decided that it had to be legal. So it is. Only 35 states have specific laws making physician-assisted suicide a crime. Now, physician-assisted suicide is different from euthanasia. In euthanasia, the doctor will administer the medication. In physician-assisted suicide, the physician will give you the medication or prescribe it for you and tell you how to use it. So it's a little bit different. But what's interesting is that Washington's Death with Dignity Act, 2008, states the patient's death certificate shall list the underlying terminal disease as the cause of death. Thus, these suicides are not even counted as suicides. There's no record of how many of these suicides are taking place. When I went to Nevada in 2012, just before I went, there was a particularly tragic suicide where an elderly man went out to the cemetery where his wife was buried. And by her gravestone, he called 911 and said there was a man brandishing a pistol. A deputy responded. When the deputy got out of his car, the man took a shooting stance, pointed his gun at the deputy. The deputy, startled, responded and shot the man. The man's gun was empty. You know what you call that? Suicide by cop. Suicide by cop. And it was all over the news. Very tragic, very sad account. This was a response in some of the Nevada websites that we should have a suicide booth. Hey, wait, shouldn't we have these by now? I demand suicide. How much is it? 25 cents. Make it cheap. Make it available for people to take their own lives. Encourage that. That's the mindset in which we live.